Welcome to Change the Narrative. I'm your host, JD Fuller, an African-American, licensed psychotherapist, professor, diversity coach, consultant, and author. We talk about the isms. We talk about the phobias, anything that marginalizes and oppresses. Everything we are not and everything we are is because of fear. Through a mental health lens, we'll have difficult conversations with celebrity guests, political activists, and everyone in between. Our mind will tell us whatever we want to believe, but the truth lives in the body, and that's where change occurs. Are you ready to change the narrative? Welcome to Change the Narrative with JD Fuller. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and also your flexibility, you deserve an award for that. Thank you for not taking it personally and just working with me, man. Sometimes the left doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So I appreciate
hear that. We all
as
have to
well.
be really flexible these days. Such a necessity.
I appreciate when people know that as well. I want to start off by learning a little bit more about your background.
Yeah.
How did you find your way? Where are you from, first of all? And how did you find your way to mental health?
Yeah, so I was born in Shanghai, China, and I immigrated to the US when I was 5, and I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I found my way to mental health in part because I've always just been super curious about the mind and how, psychology works. And I was a psychology undergrad and, went to grad school from there. But also as a way to kind of better understand myself and my family. I think a lot of therapists find their way into this field as a way to, better understand and heal their own attachment and their own traumas.
And if they're not honest about that, that's a problem.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how your history, your experience of immigration, and basically that journey on psychology impacts your parenting or has impacted your parenting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I had a lot of attachment disruptions growing up where my parents had left me in the care of my grandparents to immigrate to the U.S. And then I left my grandparents, who were the only caregivers that I had memory of, to immigrate to the U.S. to join my parents. And all of those kind of attachment disruptions left me feeling really anxious and insecure and not really knowing what to do with myself as a young child. And I think all of that certainly impacted the way that I viewed relationships and safety and attachment, and also really drove my desire to learn more so I can both heal myself and others.
And so, oftentimes when you've had that type of experience in your background, it comes out in your parenting as being overly attached and a codependent, way of parenting. How have you managed that and sort of bargained with yourself about that?
Yeah. Oh, that's the second part of the question that I didn't answer. Sorry about that. Actually,
That's okay.
I feel like it's impacted my parenting in a really positive way, and that I have approached parenting so intentionally. I
Okay.
always kind of figured that my desire to have kids was rooted in like a repetition compulsion, wanting to heal the past and provide a different experience for my children. But then I was also really intentional in that I got a doctorate in school and child clinical psychology, and really learned some valuable skills and information about child development and child psychology. But I think the most important element, both for myself and for any parent, is that the more we're able to regulate ourselves and the more we're able to approach these ruptures and things that happen in the work of parenting with patience and calmness, the better the parenting actually becomes. And it's the process, not each individual incident that happens. And so I have found that the less anxiety and attention that I really over focus on parenting, the better my kids are and feel, and the healthier we all are.
So I'm going to need you to repeat that, because that is the thing I say to parents most. The part about parenting with anxiety. Please just repeat that
Yes.
again.
The more you can regulate yourself and feel whole and nourished and satisfied on your own, and the more you can sort of let your kids show you who they are and become who they are with, some guidance, but pretty minimal, the better
Yeah.
everyone is. Children, yourself, the
Yeah.
family unit. There's so much more ease when we can trust in each other and ourselves.
Mm, mm. And that's a challenge when you've had, the trauma of immigration.
Yeah.
That's I hear so many stories, and I'm really doing a lot of work with clients whose families have immigrated, and I'm just noticing so much that
Yeah.
comes up with that. And attachment is one, because the
Mhm.
scenario is somebody watches the kids, a parent or both parents go, set up the sort of house and work, and then bring people over. And that separation, I mean, talk about how that impacts mental health. I think it should be normalized more.
Yeah, I mean, I always say every immigration story is a trauma story because there is
Hmm.
inherently the need to leave your community, your language, your culture, everything that you know that's familiar in pursuit of something different and hopefully better. And, generally people don't leave situations that are really working for them. And so the
Right.
decision to leave, it's itself huge, but then having to make your home in a whole new environment, I mean, that is inherently traumatic. And for many immigrants, the priority is survival. They're thinking about how to put food on the table, how to pay the bills, how to make ends meet, and they're providing in very tangible ways, but also probably really stressed out and maybe not as emotionally available, or able to invest in other ways, in their families, in their children. And so children of immigrants really grow up with that framework, and having to make up for some of that in different ways, and that can cause a whole bunch of adaptations as these children become adults, and how they view relationships and approach productivity and success and hustle, and how they prioritize their time based on what was modeled for them.
That's so amazingly said, and I want to add one piece to that I've
Mm.
I've seen as well, which is, the first generation has a challenge between assimilation and integration. And
Mm.
oftentimes, what I see is they become over Americanized, if you will. And
Mm.
it becomes a challenge for the parents, because it appears to be a loss of self, which is kind of like everything you
Mm.
fought for to get your children here,
Right, right,
they
right, right.
might be, or the fear of leaving the part of the story behind. And I think that's
Yeah.
equally traumatic.
Yeah, yeah. It can be so confusing for children of immigrants because they
Mhm.
grow up like embodying these Western values that the parents really held in such high regard, and then they're told, "Well, you're too white now. You're too American. Like you're embodying these elements that we don't actually want you to embody, even though we raised you in this way." And so that
Yes.
biculturalism, and being able to retain elements of home culture as well as assimilating to dominant culture is definitely a struggle. And I think it's an individual and personal journey for everybody.
Mhm. I already can tell that we're going to need to find a time to do this again in the future, because I could just keep going on this, but I'm going to move on.
Yeah,
I
there's
find it
there's so much
so
richness here.
fascinating. Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much to cover when you talk about that. Um, I want to talk about something that we've all been saying lately, and get your perspective on what it means to you, which is decolonizing mental health. What does that mean to
Mm-hmm.
you?
I think it means to really examine the history and underlying assumptions of psychology as a field, of mental health as a field, and really acknowledging that so much of the foundational pieces of this field is based on Eurocentric, white, middle class people and their problems. And it's developed by old white guys. And a lot of that stuff doesn't apply to people of the global majority, people who don't have the privilege and access that some of these ideas and theories were based upon. And it doesn't integrate the diverse and rich cultural histories that people of the global majority come with. And it certainly doesn't look at the impacts of systemic oppression and just different levels of power that we are all, operating under in a society. And so decolonizing mental health is just sort of getting to the roots of, what traditional Western psychology looks like, and, understanding that contextual factors really matter, and reconnecting and reestablishing, people to elements of their own ancestral ways of healing, and there different elements of mental health and psychology that deviate from the Western white norm.
It always feels when I have these conversations or I'm doing a training or teaching, it always feels like I am rejecting, the Eurocentric lens, when instead I'm trying to normalize the idea of a multicultural lens that is equally clinical, and that it should not be separated as an afterthought. And it's so much resistance when it comes to that idea, right? What's that about? I think we know, but I'd like to hear you say it.
White supremacy, the white supremacy
Okay.
delusion, right? Like, it's really, really hard when people who are used to historically being centered are decentered. Even if they're not truly being decentered, or just trying to, expand the container to also center other people, it feels scary. It feels there's a fragility to it, and that causes a lot of defensiveness and shame responses and backlash. And you see it so much in everything, and the ways that people everything, yeah, the ways that people personalize it, when like it's not personal. None of this is personal.
Right. That brings up for me that the idea that fragility, the word in and of itself, and the writing about it, it comes off as such a delicate, wholesome response. And I literally can't, I've said this before, I'll say it again. I've literally never seen anything more aggressive in my life than white fragility.
Yeah, it's not delicate at all. I mean, it's cheerful, but it's violent. It's aggressive. It's a weaponization of one's shame response, of their tears, of this strong emotional defenses that come up when your existential fear is activated. But what is really mind-boggling is that people who fall into these fragility responses, you're experiencing this like in this moment about this one thing, whereas people of the global majority are experiencing this constantly about everything. And it is just the inability to decenter oneself that drives so much of this, and that is just like so aggravating for the rest of us.
And we're supposed to have patience with it and tolerate our own racial trauma at the same time. And when people tell me, they're tired of, oh, this is so overwhelming, I can't even believe what's coming out of their mouths. It's really off-putting.
It's like so overwhelming for
it
you?
Makes me want to step
really?
away. Yeah. For you, this one time.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard to believe, right?
Yeah.
I'm with you on that. You wrote something on your.
Sorry. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead, add.
Oh, I was just gonna say that I think the way that it manifests, and the like shrouds of whiteness, really makes it feel so personal. The people are like, you are attacking me, and it's like, no one's attacking you. Like, if you can separate yourself from whiteness as an identity like marker, you're so much more than your whiteness. I'm just attacking the whiteness and the white supremacy delusion parts that you embody. That's like not just you, it's everybody. It's the system, it's the process, it's how our entire society is designed. That's what I'm attacking. So the delusion itself is what makes it feel so personal.
When you say that, I want to respond with something that that feels like just so aligned with that, which is the individualistic nature of a Eurocentric mentality
Yes.
is how it becomes personal. When in fact, I'm starting to believe it's a deeper strategy to use this fragility in a way so that we don't look at the system. We're too distracted trying to manage the individual's responses versus backing off, because people are more offended. And we've said this many a times on the show. People are more offended by being called a racist than they are about racism. And that's just alarming when I say that aloud each and every time, right?
Yeah. Someone once, I think it was a comment on one of my videos that when I described a fragility incident, where someone said, like, it's possible that this was a performance, right? It was a deliberate, intentional, like, weaponization of fragility as kind of a narcissistic protest that, like, people can weaponize it. And, like, I mean, that made so much sense, but I was also just so disheartening to me. Like, oh gosh, it's so layered.
It's so layered. It's so layered. And with that, I'm going to go to your website and ask you what you meant by something you have on there.
Sure.
You have, let me find where I wrote it. So what do you mean when you say you translate science and theory into stackable applications for liberated, intentional lives? And how does that manifest into one's authentic self?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much that's fascinating about, psychological research, and I'm still like science data nerd, even though I like dunk on, Western psychology a lot. Like, but there is actually a lot that I have learned and value and appreciate from it. And one of the benefits to having a PhD is that I can interpret research and translate it. And so, I do that in my TikToks. I do that, in therapy, in my podcast appearances, of just trying to distill down or break down like the dense research into little nuggets that people can take away and apply and understand. And I think these little small pieces over time really build and can help people, make small changes to improve their lives, better understand themselves.
Do you think, I'm sorry, say that last part again?
And better understand themselves?
Got it. Got it. So, do you think that, and this has always been my fear with how the education on social media has grown. Do you think it's inviting people towards more therapy, or making them think when they show up, for one of your videos, that's their therapy session?
I sure hope not. I try to reiterate in my content anyways that, like, this is not a replacement for therapy because I don't know you. These are generalizations.
Right.
These are like tips and, sweeping statements. This is not individualized. It's not an intervention. It's not therapy. So I'm sure it goes both ways, where some people are like, well, I can't afford therapy. It's not accessible to me. So I'll just watch like mental health TikToks and like, it's better than nothing. Whereas other people are like, well, I don't need to go to therapy because I'm all over mental health TikTok. But what I have seen that I've actually really loved and appreciated is how often people bring these TikToks to their therapists and then they talk about it.
That's
People have
great.
shared like, oh, I've shared your TikTok, so many of them with my therapist, and we've like, broken down how this applies to my life and ways that I can utilize and apply this. And, I love it when my clients bring, TikToks to session, and either it's just like, humor or different like entry points to talking more and expanding deeper about whatever it is that they're going through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. My clients have done that too, and I do really appreciate it. But I just always think it's important to say that, sort of this
Not a
disclaimer
replacement
up
for
front.
therapy. Yeah.
Yes, yes. One of my favorite topics is one that you've talked about, which is transforming shame into guilt. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I really got into this topic when I did some training with a shame researcher, Dr. Steve Finn, and he really changed the way that I looked at shame and guilt. It's such a historically like it's a negative emotions. This is what we think of them, And we
Hmm.
don't really talk about the evolutionary adaptive functions of these emotions. Why do we experience them? Are they valuable to our survival in communities? And the answer is yes. And,
Hmm.
in kind of the pop psychology rhetoric, it's like, oh, these are so uncomfortable, let's get rid of them. But really, like, what can we learn from having these experiences, and how can we move through them so we don't get stuck in them, but we also don't
Right.
lose the lesson of whatever, you know, sparks these feelings, because they are
Hmm.
necessary social cohesive emotions for our survival in groups.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, I tend to feel as though shame is a part of a deeper realm of emotions people get lost and stuck in. And I feel like guilt
Hmm.
has, my experience is guilt has a little bit more levity. It's got a little bit
Yep.
more fluidity. You can
Yep. Yep.
really
It's more
use guilt as a
activating.
springboard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shame is like, you crumble, you implode, you
Yeah.
kind of dissociate, and you just get stuck in
Hmm.
it. But if you're able to, crawl out of that shame pit and actually transform that emotion to guilt, like, it can motivate apology, it can be activating to make repair and amends. It's what allows us to, try to do good with our mistakes. Let
Right.
that be, yeah,
Yeah, that's it
impetus.
exactly.
Hmm.
Yeah, I agree with that so much. And I think the other piece is that shame is so connected to religiosity
Hmm.
that deepens the stuckness, because
Yeah.
they're it's so related to what God said or your higher power said it's about,
Mm.
and that's the stuckness that people find difficult to move out of as well.
Yeah, and even the guilt part, when like repentance is such a part of like what you need to do in order to like get back to good, like you get really stuck on kind of the behavioral elements, or, what you need to say or do in order to like get rid of this feeling, rather than the relational elements or the self-compassion elements and the acceptance. Because a lot of the things that people end up being shamed or, feeling guilt for are not things that are necessarily wrong or within their control.
Mm.
They're maybe wrong by some religious doctrines and like historic, worldviews, but in kind of a modern day perspective, in understanding the whole self and understanding like, well, where did I learn this and how did I, develop all of these feelings about this? We learned that a lot of this stuff is not necessarily bad or like deserving of shame and guilt.
Yes, exactly. You know, that brings me to another one of yours. I think it was a TikTok and another fave of mine. I must say this 100 times a day, which is thoughts versus feelings. Can you talk about
Mm-hmm.
that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think people get confused, right? It's like, what are you feeling? Well, I'm feeling like I want to punch him in the face. Like, okay, that's not a feeling. That is an impulse. Yeah. I mean, thoughts are what's in our head. These are the little kind of fleeting things that show up of, what, like the cognitive elements of our experience, and they are actually the last thing to come online. The first thing that we experience in our body is our physical sensations, and then that informs our emotional feelings, and then we form some thoughts about it, like, oh, this must mean that I am unlovable, this means that I need to work until midnight to make up for it. All of these thoughts that we have, we're so disconnected from our bodies that it's the first thing that we notice or the only thing that we notice, but it's really the last thing to come online. And so I think so much of my work with people is, bottom up. Like, okay, you have that thought. Now let's track it back, right? Well, I mean, that's top down, but like eventually get to a point where
Yeah.
like, okay, what are you feeling in your body so you can make sense of that and then come to a thought
Hmm.
at the very last part, rather than only focusing on the thoughts and trying to
I'm
let that be the decision maker.
I'm fascinated how many adults I use the feeling chart with.
Yeah, yeah, the little wheel, it's great.
Because my favorite is the faces, the kids' faces.
Yeah, yeah, I like that
And they
one
have a
too.
multicultural now, which is great. And I've
Mm,
actually texted it to client because I think part of the reason people get so hung up in their thoughts is they really don't know what feelings are. And I'm
They
fascinated
don't
how
know
we,
what
we
they're
grow through our
feeling.
lives, and, this disconnection from our bodies manifests in a
Yeah.
disconnection from the language and actually the definition, which is pretty amazing. So I
Mhm.
love that idea of what you do with your clients. I think that's so important.
Yeah, and I mean, think about how like this disconnection from body serves our systems of oppression and power and capitalism, right? Like if we just think the brain is king and that's the only thing that's important, then we'll just keep working. We'll let those thoughts drive
Mhm.
everything. We're going to ignore what the body needs and we will produce more and more and be more commodified. It's by design in a lot of ways.
It's so by design. I really appreciate you saying that. Um, So one of the things that I'm big on is the idea of pulling us all together. And I'm going to give
Mhm.
you each of these labels or ways to identify us. And I want to
Uh-huh.
know, I've already heard you use one, and I want to
Mhm.
know your response to the others.
Okay.
So the one that you use that I use all the time is the global majority,
Yep.
but then there's
Mhm.
also people of color, and
Uh-huh.
then the one that a lot of people seem to gravitate towards is BIPOC.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Talk to me about this.
Um, you know, I think that's been kind of like language is always evolving, and
Mhm.
there's been a lot of, I think, like political elements around the ways that people identify and the language that we use. So like at one point I just said people of color because that was what I was
Yeah.
taught. But then realizing, okay, well, that really lumps, Black and Indigenous experience in with other people of color's experiences, and they're not the same. There's a lot of privilege that other people of color may have experienced, and a lot of extra layers of erasure and oppression that Black and Indigenous folks have experienced. So then I started using BIPOC, but then people got really confused, like, okay, well, BIPOC, you're not BIPOC. BIPOC only applies to Black and Indigenous
Mhm.
folks. And like I was like, I have to like Google this and look this up, and like it's hard to find consensus around it. So some people say like Black, Indigenous, and people of color. There's like an and between the BI and the POC as a way to like distinguish the unique experiences of Black and Indigenous folks. And now, like, I think people of global majority captures a lot of it
I love
as
it.
well, because we're all people of global majority, even though we are, uh, underrepresented or marginalized or historically overlooked when it comes to Eurocentric dominant
Mhm.
Western society.
Yeah, I really challenge the word privilege when it comes to people from the global majority. None of
Mm.
us walk around with anything that we have had access to based on the color of our skin. That's the definition of privilege. We may have had more opportunities, a bit more access academically or financially, but it's not the true meaning of privilege. And I don't like to homogenize that word. I think it needs to
Mm-hmm,
stand
mm-hmm,
strong with a system of white supremacy. And the thing
mm-hmm,
that started to challenge me about BIPOC right away, it came from academia. And,
mm-hmm.
as the communities of color started to wrap themselves around it, like the white people grasped onto it. It was a great way to
Yeah,
lump
yeah,
you all together. So I immediately spat it out and rejected it. And,
yeah.
and what I love about the global majority is it's so empowering to
Mm-hmm.
us who have not been, historically unified or empowered. And we know the marginalization that exists amongst us. We
Yeah,
know the
yeah,
challenges between us. However, we are the global majority, and that's
yeah.
pretty powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you bring that up because I think, yeah, there is a lot of, oppression Olympics within groups of
Oh,
communities of color. And, if you're just like saying like, okay, Black, Indigenous are separate, right? And then it does feel like a bit of like, who wins the most traumatized award, right? And it's like, how do you honor like the unique experiences, but then not like really prioritize like oppression experience or like trauma as the only defining qualities of these different groups.
yes.
And so yeah, that's a great point. And the people of global majority is so empowering because it's like there is power in numbers, there's power in collective
Mhm.
cohesion and in working together.
Yeah. And we are collective communities. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that is the powers that we are collective. And so in
Yeah.
realizing that, I think there's some, I work with, I do a consultation with a few Yale Black psychologists,
Mm-hmm.
females.
Yeah.
And, when you're processing, there's so much pain you can feel in the
Mm-hmm.
experience of being in white spaces. And the one thing I like to reflect on is how much cohesion and support we have in spaces we create for ourselves.
Yep.
And that cannot
Yep.
be replaced or overlooked because it comes from a history of collectivism. And I always
Yep.
want to reflect that as an empowerment perspective.
Yeah, and like how collectivist values really run consistently through all of our cultures. And we may come
That's
from
it.
different, cultures within the global majority, but one thing that does really unify us is at least a lean or a bend towards collectivist values over individualistic values that more, European Americans tend to embody.
I think it's an important nuance for us to continue to hold. I think it's
Hmm.
important.
Hmm. Yeah.
So let's jump to all of your social media. You have, we'll get to the social media, but you also have a TEDx. You've been in HuffPost. You've been in BuzzFeed. Tell us all of your social media and also tell us what's next, please.
Oh my goodness. The TEDx was a really fun, cool, recent thing that I did. That was always kind of like a life goal of mine, and I felt, so I was so proud of myself when I was able to do that.
It's great.
Yeah, I mean, I started just kind of making TikToks as a pandemic boredom hobby, and it took off and has opened up so many doors for me. And I've had all of these wonderful opportunities to comment on like media articles. I made content with Headspace, the meditation app, and that was super
Oh,
fun.
cool.
Yeah, what's next? Me and Dr. Raquel Martin, who is a Black psychologist based in Nashville, we have a course that we debuted this fall called Becoming an Anti-Racist and Anti-Oppressive Clinician. And we, you know, had 3 trainings on it. We presented this workshop, and it was really well received. It's all, virtual, and we're now in the midst of trying to grow that, like forming some community around it, or, being able to present this in person to various universities or community mental health clinics. That has been really energizing and exciting because this is like our baby that we have made
Mhm.
ourselves. Like no one's sponsoring us. It's not like a corporation saying you have to say this or that. So that's been
Yeah.
just super nourishing and empowering for us, and we're really excited to be able to share that. Yeah, and I'm just doing more speaking things around different, you know, employee resource groups and organizations as well, and that's also been really fun.
I love that y'all are doing the how to be more of an anti-racist clinician. I got a lot of years on y'all, and it's been just feeling like I was out there alone with a handful of
Yeah.
others without social media. And so it's very exciting to me as
Hmm.
an elder to see this happening
Oh.
and to know that it continues to grow. It really does warm my heart and makes me very excited for you all.
Well, you know what? We are able to run because you were walking. You paved the way. Like, it's such an important thing for us to always remember that no information is brand new. Like, we stand on the shoulders of giants. Like, every single thing that we are sharing, it's because someone before us has paved the way for us to have the safety and privilege of being able to share. And then, you know, continuously, for everyone that we are touching as well. And so there's
Yeah,
so much
yeah.
gratitude, to you for paving that way when it was so much more lonely and isolating, and I'm sure scary too.
It's true. It's true, but it does help us continue to find some hope.
Hmm.
So it's cool. It's mutual,
Yeah.
and that's what's
Yeah.
important. So give us the social media handles.
Um, Dr. Hanren on TikTok and Instagram, or drhanren.com. It's my website. I also have a group practice in Austin, Texas, and we have psychologists who serve people all over Texas. And that's Pivot Psychology Austin, or no, Pivot Psychology ATX.com.
Okay. Um, how is before I give you the final word, I just want to talk about these midterms and how the
Oof.
people of progressive mentality are dealing in Texas. That had to be
Oh,
a
yeah.
challenge.
You know, election day always falls on my birthday. Like
Oh,
2016 when Trump was elected, it was my birthday too.
oh, that's rough.
Oh my
That's rough.
gosh. So I really tried so hard to not look at anything that night. Like I just did not want to know the results. And people were texting me and like some information like peeped through and I was like, "Oh no, Beto lost." And I felt like so disheartened that I didn't even look at any other results. Like I just like I couldn't bring myself to like process more. I thought it was just going to be continuously bad. And it wasn't until a few days
Mhm.
later when people like I was actually getting that information. I was like, "Oh, it's not that bad. It's not that bad." Like I mean, it's, bad in Texas, but it's not surprising in Texas. But like kind of on a
Right, true.
national level of like, okay, we
Mhm.
retained the Senate and there's actually been a lot happening that prevented this red wave from occurring. And that was reassuring and nourishing. And I'm gonna do what we can in Texas, but I don't hold my breath here.
Mhm. I appreciate that because the reframe is always important. I do think the grief that we felt from, Abrams and Beto not making it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
those were two tough ones, I think, for
Oh,
all
I
of us
know.
who
Wasn't
are,
even
you know,
close. Ugh, that was
mm,
the hardest part. I thought it would be closer at least.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I appreciate the reframe. I think that's important. Look, Doc, it's been such a pleasure. You are amazing.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been so nice to be
Yeah.
here.
Really thoroughly enjoyed your company and sharing the space with you. I'd love to have another conversation with you in the future and find out what you're up to. Please share your final thought word. What do you want to leave here on the runway?
Hmm. I think I just have this holiday that's coming up. This year, all years, maybe let's really combat the myth of Thanksgiving and challenge what we were told in elementary school about what this holiday actually is and name it for what it is, which is genocidal colonizer celebration. And what does that look like to decolonize or liberate your family's traditions from this historic framework, and what are small things that you can do to expand on that. So, we are trying to read more indigenous books and look up where the land that we occupy and just really get more in touch with the roots of this holiday and maybe do less shopping.
Oh, yes. Remember, we were in a pandemic 2 years ago. Moving
Yep,
forward.
yep, yep.
Thank you again so much. It's been a pleasure. Everybody, check Doc out. Amazing. Appreciate you. Be well. Till next time.
Thank you so much.